Hi everyone, it's Dan, here with another over-the-board game that I played. This one was played much more recently in July of 2014. I am black, my opponent is white, and we get into the French defense, more specifically the Winawer variation with bishop to b4. My opponent pushes in the center, here comes the thematic c5 break, a3 to challenge the bishop, and I exchange, damaging the white pawn structure in the process. But here, I actually play a move that swings the advantage to white. I was looking at my c5 pawn and didn't want to let it be captured so easily. However, I also didn't want to straighten out his pawns by taking c captures d. So here I pushed c4, but this move is bad for a couple of reasons. One, in the French Winawer, the c file is where black is going to get a lot of counterplay, and I just closed it up, so I'm not going to be playing on that file anytime soon. Two, this pawn move doesn't help my development at all. What would have been better here instead is knight to e7, headed to f5, and also possibly allowing kingside castling. 3. White taking on c5 isn't something that I really should have been worried about, since he would be taking away from the center and end up with tripled isolated pawns, which would have basically been big targets for me later in the game. Anyway, continuing with the game, after c4 here, white takes the initiative at this very early stage in the game on move 7. The move played here is queen to g4, and notice that had I actually played knight e7, knight f5 would very conveniently defend g7. However, since I don't have that knight move available, I'm pretty much forced to play g6, which weakens my dark squares, and without a dark square bishop around, this is already amounting to an advantage for white. White gets in more development. I play now knight to e7. White puts me in a pin, which is very uncomfortable. Here I castle, which my opponent later explained to me was very uncommon in the Winawer. Much more common here is to castle on the queen side. In hindsight, it seems obvious now that castling on the king side puts my king in the line of fire. At the time, I was thinking that castling queenside was going to take a lot longer, so I might as well castle short. But of course, castling is always about king safety, and on the king side, there is no safety right now. So it stands to reason that it's worth taking the extra time to go long if it will mean getting my king safe. In any event, white here, after I castle, keeps up the pressure with queen to h4. I play knight on b to c6 to defend, but the computer here actually recommends a5, getting out of the pin, while at the same time throwing a counterpunch at white by targeting c3. If we go just a couple moves down this computer line, the computer still scores this position pretty heavily in white's favor, but at least black has some decent piece placement. The queen is pressurizing the weak pawn on c3, and the knight on f5 is doing a good job of defending the king side. Black is still in trouble, but positionally is at least making the best out of a bad situation. But again, if we go back, I did not play queen a5 in this position. After the knight move that I played to c6 to link the knights together, black sinks the bishop into f6, which is putting quite the grip on the dark squares around my king. But here I can see clearly that I need to drum up some counterplay somehow, so now I play queen to a5. This is kind of an uncomfortable move for white to have to meet, since the bishop is no longer able to come back to defend. So white is pretty much forced into king to d2, which is played in the game. I get in knight to f5, and the queen backs up to h3. This, however, leads to a tactic. Queen to f4 here would have been better, since queen to h3 allows me to snag a pawn, taking advantage of the pin. The knights are exchanged, and now the game is much closer to equal than it had been just a few moves ago. White still has an advantage here, but before the computer was scoring it to be quite crushing, over 3 points, and now it's closer to just 1 point. Anyway, from here, white starts the pawn storm with pawn to g4. I swing the knight over to put more pressure on c3. White develops the light square bishop, and here, unfortunately, I end up making a big mistake which eventually cost me the game. I didn't blunder mate in 1 or anything. Instead, I missed a chance to essentially draw the game. If you'd like, pause the video and try to find how black can almost assure a draw or a crushing position. Okay, the move I missed was pawn to d4. This brings a third attacker on c3 and also comes with the threat of pawn to d3, which would come with both tempo on the bishop and would block the queen's defense of c3. Apparently the computer is saying the best white can do now is go for a perpetual. Queen to h6 threatens mate, but black just goes into check mode and the game would end here with this perpetual check. And if we go back, if instead of the queen playing to h6, if white plays something else, the advantage swings dramatically to black's favor. One example would be, let's just say, the bishop playing back to f1 to avoid the tempo, but here bishop d3 is still played, and now with the rooks disconnected, the bishop needs to give itself up, after which comes queen to c3 check, then the bishop falls, then the knight comes in, and black is definitely the attacking side here, while white now has to be careful in order not to lose the game. So if we back up to this position right here, this position right here, after the bishop played to e2, d4 would have secured me either a draw, or if my opponent made a mistake, I probably would have won the game, or at least I would have had a much better position than I ended up having. However, unfortunately, again, I did not play that. Instead, I chose here to activate my light square bishop and played pawn to b6. Now, white here still can't go for this checkmate because I would be able to get the perpetual. So if the white queen plays to h6, you can still have the queen crashing through on c3, and we still end up with this perpetual. So instead, just to back up, after the pawn pushes to b6, white now decides to start playing on the queen side, and he brings his rook over to b1. This pretty much forces me into the queen exchange, where I end up with 2 pawns for a piece, since now that the a1 rook is protected, there's no more perpetual with queen captures c3 check. So we do end up in this position, and from here, white simply has a decisive advantage, and I have pretty much no chance for counterplay at all. The game goes on actually for another 15 moves, but unfortunately, like I said, there's nothing really I can do. I'm down material and stuck with a terrible bishop, while white just has all day to reposition his pieces, get in the pawn breaks he wants, and just put the squeeze on me. The rest of the game isn't too instructive, so I'll just move through it quickly. We continue playing, and eventually we have a pair of rooks coming off the board. He does get his other rook to the 7th, and once again I'm in a terrible pin. He starts to get his king active, and I try to get it to a square where I can get out of the pin and have my rook protected. c3 now lets his light square bishop play, since it can reroute along the light squares now. I bring the king over to help out on the queen side, but bishop to d1 stops that plan, because if we have king to e8, then bishop to a4 is just game over. I see this, however, and so I don't play the king over. Instead, the move that I play is bishop to c6. The rooks do come off, but again, since I'm down material, that's actually bad news for me. However, I don't really see how I could have let his rook just sit there on the 7th, so basically, again, I have no really good options here. Bishop d8 goes after my pawn, and in order to protect it, I have to move it to b5, but that just allows the king to infiltrate the position. And just a few moves later, once we get here, actually after the bishop plays back, I resign, because there's really just nothing left for me to do. I have to move my king on the next turn, and in the meanwhile, the white king is going to maneuver around and eventually pick up the pawn, and this position is just completely lost. Obviously, I actually probably could have resigned a while ago, but as it was, again, this was the position I resigned in right here after the bishop played back. So that's another game. This one was even more frustrating than the last one. The last one I had the win but ended up drawing, and this one I had a draw and then ended up losing. However, by examining my games, I think my play will really improve, and I'm also going to be playing more over the board games, I think, so that will be more material for me to cover and more lessons to be learned. I've also found some people to study openings with, and hopefully I'll be able to get more opening videos up as well. Finally, I also have an idea for a middle game series that I'd really like to get started on. Of course, I can't put too much on my plate at once, but there is a lot to do, and I'm going to chip away at it as fast as I can. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Questions, comments, and ratings are always welcome. And take care. Bye.